My name is Juliana Whitmore, and I'm 24 years old. If you'd walked into my life 3 months ago, you would have thought I was one of those people who had everything figured out. A good job, a beautiful house, a fresh start after the worst year of my life. You wouldn't have seen the hairline fractures. You wouldn't have heard the echo of my father's voice in every room. And you definitely wouldn't have guessed that the person who was about to hurt me the most was my own mother. The story really began the day I moved into the house my dad left me. It sits in a quiet Scottsdale neighborhood called Desert Ridge, where the lawns look airbrushed and tall palm trees sway like they're posing for a postcard. The first time I pulled into the driveway with all my belongings packed into a borrowed pickup, the late afternoon sun bounced off the white stucco like the house was glowing from the inside. 4 bedrooms, a kitchen with granite countertops and a center island big enough to land a small plane, a backyard pool that shimmered turquoise against the desert sky. After the shoebox studio I'd been renting in downtown Phoenix, where my bed and dresser practically shook hands, this place felt like a mansion. But it wasn't just big, it was personal. My dad, Mark Whitmore, hadn't just bought this house 4 years earlier. He'd built his pride into it. He'd started out laying concrete in the Arizona heat, slowly working his way up until he owned Henderson Construction Company. On one of our first weekends here, he'd walked me through every room like a kid showing off a science fair project. "I picked this hardwood myself," he'd said, tapping his knuckles lightly on the floor. "And these cabinets? Custom. No one else has them." In his office, he'd pointed at the security system panel like it was a trophy. "If anything ever happens," he'd told me, "this place will take care of you." At the time, I thought he was just being overprotective. I didn't know that anything would be a sudden heart attack at 47. That some invisible genetic time bomb in his chest would go off 6 months ago and take him with it. Too young, too fast, too final. The house was the last big thing he did before he died. And somehow, even though I was young and supposedly had my whole life ahead of me, he left it to me. So 3 months after his funeral, I walked through the front door with my boxes, set my keys on the granite counter, and just stood there. The air smelled faintly of his cologne and coffee. His construction awards lined the walls of his office. Family photos, me with missing front teeth, me in braces, me at high school graduation, smiled back from the bookshelves. Everywhere I looked, I saw proof that he'd existed. Everywhere I walked, I heard the ghost of his laugh. "This is yours now, Jules," I whispered to myself that first night, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, eating takeout straight from the container. "Don't screw it up." My parents hadn't always lived in houses like this. They got married because of me, an unplanned pregnancy, 2 scared young people, and a lot of pressure from both families. My mom used to joke that I was the most expensive wedding invitation they ever printed. By the time I was 8, that rushed decision had snowballed into screaming fights, slammed doors, and long, icy silences. Dad's long hours building his company were fuel for Mom's resentment. Mom's bitterness about giving up her own dreams was fuel for his guilt. Eventually, the fire burned too hot. The divorce was messy, but on paper, it looked fair. Mom got around $80,000 in the settlement, plus monthly alimony. Dad got joint custody and the freedom to devote himself to Henderson Construction. I became the ball in their emotional ping-pong match. Weekdays with Mom, weekends with Dad. 2 bedrooms, 2 sets of rules, 2 entirely different versions of what family meant. Still, I love them both. They just couldn't love each other anymore. Mom remarried first. She met Greg at a church social, and within 3 years they were married. Greg worked at a manufacturing plant. Steady money, nothing glamorous. Then came my half-siblings. Brooklyn, now 12, all drama and glitter and big feelings. And Mason, 10, a walking sports encyclopedia with a permanent cowlick. The age gap made things weird. When they were little, I was more like a third exhausted adult than a sister. But they were good kids. It was never their fault our family tree looked like someone had tried to redraw it in the dark. Dad never remarried. He poured himself into his business and into our weekends. Hiking in Sedona, Diamondbacks games, fixing things around whatever house he was renting at the time. When he finally bought the Scottsdale place, everything shifted. Our weekends became something sacred. Little pockets of normal in a life that was anything but. Living here now, without him, was both comforting and brutal. Sometimes I'd sit in his office, surrounded by those framed certificates and family photos, and swear I could hear his chair creak, his fingers tapping on the desk, his low hum when he was concentrating. This house wasn't just an inheritance, it was an anchor, a promise, a reminder of the man who taught me that hard work pays off and that family helps family. I just didn't know how far that motto would be stretched. It was a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after I'd moved in, when everything started to tilt. I was by the pool, laptop closed for once, my marketing job still buzzing faintly in the back of my brain. The sky was streaked pink and orange, and the surface of the water reflected it perfectly. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Then my phone rang. Mom flashed on the screen. Her voice came through the speaker, already shaking. Jules, honey, I need to ask you something. My stomach tightened. Mom didn't usually lead with that tone unless something was really wrong. What happened? I asked, sitting up straighter. It's Greg, she said. The whole plant shut down last month. No warning. They closed Phoenix Metalworks overnight. He hasn't had a paycheck in weeks. I glanced instinctively at the house, at the soft glow of the kitchen lights behind me. We've been staying at the Desert Inn Motel in Van Buren for 2 weeks, she continued, her voice cracking. But we're almost out of money. Her voice broke completely. I don't know what to do. In the background, I could hear Brooklyn and Mason. Their voices echoed in a way that told me everything about the size of the room they were in. Too small, too cramped, too temporary. How much do you need? I asked, already halfway to my purse, as if I could fix everything with a credit card. It's not just money, sweetheart, Mom said quickly. We need somewhere to stay, just for a little while, just until Greg finds something else. You have all that space now, and we're almost homeless. I looked around. 4 bedrooms, open floor plan, a pool. All of it technically mine. The logical part of my brain started listing pros and cons, like a spreadsheet. I lived alone. The house was huge. They were family. It was temporary. The emotional part hesitated. My mother has always had a way of filling a room, not just with her presence, but with her opinions, her routines, her needs. And Greg liked to settle in. I thought of Dad, of how proud he'd been of this house, of how he'd always said, family helps family, Jules. That's what it's for. I heard myself say, of course you can stay here. Pack your things and come over tonight if you need to. Mom sobbed with relief. Oh, Juliana, you're saving our lives. I promise, it's just until Greg finds a job. You won't even notice we're there. 2 hours later, a battered Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. Greg climbed out first, looking wrung out. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. He started unloading garbage bags full of clothes, mismatched boxes, a plastic bin of kids' toys. Mom rushed to me and hugged me so tightly I almost lost my balance. Thank you, she whispered, over and over. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Brooklyn and Mason hovered near the car, their eyes wide. After weeks in a motel, the house must have looked like a palace. Whoa, Mason breathed when they stepped inside. Do you really live here, Juliana? For now, I said with a small smile, and so do you. I gave Mom and Greg the master guest suite with its big window and private bathroom. The kids got the room with the twin beds Dad had set up for when they visited on weekends. Within an hour, the quiet house was full of footsteps and voices and the rustling sound of people trying to make themselves at home. That night, Mom and I sat on the back patio while the kids splashed in the shallow end of the pool. The air smelled like chlorine and desert dust. This is just until Greg finds something, she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. He's applied to Home Depot, Costco, a few smaller places. Something will come through soon. Greg, sitting in Dad's favorite chair in the living room, raised his beer in our direction without getting up. I appreciate this more than you know, Juliana, he called. I've been working since I was 16. I've never been unemployed this long. It's humbling. Family helps family, I replied, the words tasting like Dad's voice in my mouth. You'd do the same for me. And I meant it. Despite everything, the divorce, the remarriage, the complicated loyalties, Mom had worked herself to the bone when I was a kid. 2 jobs, late nights. She never badmouthed Dad in front of me, even when she had every reason to. If she needed help now, how could I not give it? As the evening wore on, I watched Brooklyn and Mason race up the stairs, calling dibs on beds and sides of the closet. I watched Greg lean back deeper into Dad's chair, feet planted like he'd grown roots there. I watched Mom drift into the kitchen and start opening cabinets, rearranging mugs and spices like she'd done it 1,000 times. The house felt fuller, warmer, less like a museum dedicated to my father and more like a real home. But somewhere underneath the warmth, something else stirred. A small voice in the back of my mind whispered, careful. Careful about how quickly people settle in. Careful about how easily temporary turns into forever. I heard the voice. I understood it. And then, like so many people do, when the warning comes from inside instead of outside, I chose to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being selfish, that Dad would want this. I had no idea that letting them through the front door was the first step toward almost losing the house entirely. Or that, before this was over, I'd be standing in this same driveway, watching the police escort my own mother off the property. If you've ever had guests stay just for a little while, you know there's a moment when the air shifts. At first, it's fun, chaotic in a good way. Extra shoes by the door, extra laughter at the table. Then, slowly, without a clear timestamp, it stops feeling like a visit and starts feeling like something else. For me, that moment came about a month after my mom and her family moved in. On the surface, nothing dramatic had happened. There was no big fight, no storming off, no slammed doors, just tiny changes accumulating like dust on a shelf. Greg was, technically, looking for work. Every morning when I left for my marketing job downtown, he'd be at the breakfast bar with a mug of coffee and his phone. Got a few applications out, he'd tell me. I'm checking listings. I'll hit a few places later. But more and more often, when I came home in the evening, I'd find him in the exact same spot, except now he'd migrated to the couch, remote in hand, ESPN or old movies flickering across the TV. Any luck today? I'd ask, dropping my bag by the door, trying to sound neutral. He'd sigh, not taking his eyes off the screen. Man, the economy is brutal right now. Nobody's hiring, especially guys my age. But I'm staying positive. Something will break soon. Maybe if I hadn't been coming home from 12-hour days full of demanding clients and frantic emails, I would have had more sympathy. Instead, all I could see was the indention his body was slowly carving into my couch. Mom, on the other hand, didn't just exist in the house. She claimed it. The first week, she'd asked small things. Do you mind if I move this lamp? It'll make more sense here. Sweetie, where do you keep your spices? By the third week, the question stopped. Dad's heavy leather recliner, his favorite chair, was now Greg's spot. The living room furniture had been rearranged into an entirely new configuration. My dark roast coffee had been replaced by some organic, fair trade blend Mom preferred. The fridge, once stocked with my leftovers and simple groceries, now looked like a family of 4 lived there, which, to be fair, it did. Personal-sized yogurts, juice boxes, 3 different kinds of cereal. Because Brooklyn doesn't like what Mason likes. Snacks I never bought, but somehow kept paying for. The backyard had transformed too. The pool that used to be a peaceful shimmer in the desert afternoon now looked like a commercial for a toy store. Floats, goggles, inflatable animals, a plastic bucket of squirt guns. Mason's bike leaned perpetually against the patio wall. Brooklyn's art supplies migrated between the table and the ground. It wasn't that I hated the mess. I actually liked having the kids around. Brooklyn performed little shows on the patio after dinner, reciting dramatic monologues she made up on the spot. Mason cornered me in the kitchen to rattle off stats about the Phoenix Suns like a tiny ESPN commentator. They were bright, funny, and they loved me. But somewhere along the way, the balance shifted. I realized it when Mom opened the dishwasher one night, frowned, and started rearranging the plates. You're loading these wrong, she said lightly. They won't get properly clean like this. I've been loading them like that for months, I replied. They seem clean. She gave a soft chuckle, the kind that carried just enough edge to cut. It's fine, sweetheart. Some people aren't taught these things. Another night, she casually walked over to the thermostat, glanced at the number, and turned it up. Electricity isn't free, she said, and the kids get cold easily. I opened my mouth to protest. This was my utility bill, but the words died halfway to my tongue. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was temporary, that they were going through hell and I could suck it up. Every time I walked into the house after work, though, the same feeling washed over me, like I was visiting someone else's home. The only room that still fully felt like mine was Dad's office. I guarded it quietly, like a secret. No one went in there without asking. I did my best work there, my best crying, my clearest thinking. It still smelled faintly of his aftershave and printer ink. One Thursday, everything at work went sideways. A major client hated the campaign my team had spent weeks on, not just, can we tweak a few things, hate. Full, throw it out and start over, hate. My boss wanted a new proposal by Monday. By the time I finally left the office, my head hurt, my shoulders ached, and all I wanted was to go home, order Chinese from Golden Dragon, and sit by the pool in silence. In my mind, I could already taste the lo mein. When I walked through the front door, chaos hit me like a wave. Brooklyn and Mason were screaming over the TV remote, their voices ricocheting off the high ceilings. "You watched your show already," Mason yelled. "That was yesterday," Brooklyn shouted back. "It's my turn today." Greg was passed out on the couch, snoring loudly, an empty beer bottle on the coffee table next to a few others. Mom stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low voice that immediately made my stomach twitch. "Oh, he said we might have a case. Yes, I understand." "Okay, we'll talk more tomorrow." She hung up quickly when she saw me. "Hey, honey," she said. "Long day?" "You could say that," I replied, tossing my keys into the bowl by the door. "I was going to order from Golden Dragon. You want anything?" Mom blinked at me. "Oh, I threw those menus away." I stopped. "You did what?" "They're full of sodium and MSG," she said matter-of-factly, as if she were announcing the weather. "We're trying to eat healthier. I made a quinoa salad. It's in the fridge." I stared at her. "You threw away my takeout menus in my house." She frowned like I was being unreasonable. "Juliana, you work long hours. You don't need all that junk. You'll thank me later." A pressure built in my chest, spreading up my throat. "I need some air," I said finally, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in porcelain. I slid open the back door and stepped onto the patio. The desert evening was cool, the sky fading from orange to deep blue. It should have calmed me. But even the backyard wasn't mine anymore. Cigarette butts littered the edge of the patio, clustered near the spot where Greg had apparently decided to establish his smoking area. The faint smell of stale smoke clung stubbornly to the air. Dad would have hated it. He'd had a strict no-smoking rule by the pool. He said it ruined the air and disrespected the water. It was one of his quirks. We used to joke about it. And now his no-smoking rule was just one more thing casually tossed aside. Inside, I could hear Mom giving instructions to the kids, her voice taking on that crisp, commanding tone she used to use when I was little. Bedtime routines, chores, who had brushed their teeth and who hadn't. She sounded like the adult in charge. I was standing a few feet away, the actual owner of the house, and I felt like a visitor on my own patio. For the first time since they'd moved in, the thought slipped fully formed into my mind. What if they never leave? What if, until Greg finds a job, stretched into months? What if Mom decided the kids were too settled here to uproot again? What if this became the new normal and I just adapted around them? The idea made my chest feel tight. I went to bed that night with my jaw clenched, the taste of quinoa still on my tongue, the craving for lo mein stubbornly refusing to fade. The next week, that uneasy feeling grew teeth. One evening, as we washed dishes together, Mom glanced around the kitchen with a small smile. "You know," she said, rinsing a plate, "this house is perfect for a family. Your dad did good picking this place out." "Yeah," I said carefully. "He loved it here." "It's funny how life works out, isn't it?" She stacked the plate in the rack, still smiling. "Here we are, all together under one roof. Maybe there's a reason for all this." A chill skated down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged, too casually. "Just that sometimes things fall into place the way they're supposed to. A house like this shouldn't sit half empty. It wants to be lived in." I didn't answer, but that comment wouldn't stop echoing in my head. What did she mean, the way they're supposed to? What did fall into place look like in her mind? The answer came a few nights later. I was in Dad's office, working on a presentation, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room. It was close to 9:30. The rest of the house was quiet, kids already in bed, TV off for once. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Yeah?" Mom poked her head in. "Juliana, honey, can we talk? Greg and I have something important to discuss with you." My heart gave a small, hopeful jolt. Maybe Greg had finally found a job. Maybe they were ready to talk about moving out, about timelines, about plans. Maybe this was the moment things would shift back in my favor. "Sure," I said, closing my laptop. "What's up?" I followed her into the living room. Greg was sitting on the couch, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together. He'd turned off the TV. His expression was serious in a way I wasn't used to seeing. Mom sat down in Dad's old chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "What's going on?" I asked, sinking onto the love seat across from them. Mom took a breath, smoothed invisible wrinkles from her jeans. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, "about our situation." "That's great," I said, my pulse picking up. "Did something come through for Greg?" She glanced at him. He gave her a small nod, like they'd practiced this. "I've been talking to a lawyer," she said, "about your father's will." The room seemed to tilt. I felt my fingers curl into my palms. "What about Dad's will?" I asked slowly. Mom straightened her shoulders, as if preparing to lift something heavy, except I had the sudden, razor-sharp feeling that whatever she was about to lift She was planning to set it down on me. I think there were oversights, she said calmly, in how things were handled after the divorce. Oversights that we can still correct. Every instinct in my body went on high alert. Oversights like what? I asked. She met my eyes, and for the first time since she'd moved in, I saw something clear and cold behind the tears and gratitude and soft apologies. Like the fact, she said, that this house should have been mine. She let the words hang there a beat, heavy and deliberate, before she added quietly, "And I've already filed the paperwork to contest the will." For a moment I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The room felt too small, too bright, too unfamiliar, like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare and hadn't yet realized it was my own. My mother sat in my father's favorite chair, his chair, the one he used to sink into after long days at the construction site, the one that still creaked the same way when you leaned back. She sat there as if the place already belonged to her. And Greg watched me, not with guilt, not with embarrassment, but with the look of someone waiting to be thanked for delivering bad news gently. Finally, my voice found its way out, thin, shaky. "Mom, what are you talking about?" She folded her hands neatly in her lap, a gesture that looked calm, but her jaw was tight, determined. "I supported your father for years, Juliana," she began, her tone taking on an edge I'd heard before, usually when she was building towards something she wanted. "I gave up my dreams so he could chase his. I kept our home running while he worked 12-hour days. I raised you. I maintained everything. I sacrificed more than you know." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Mom, that has nothing to do with—" She held up a hand. "Let me finish." Greg nodded beside her, giving her silent encouragement, as if they'd rehearsed this. "Your father bought this house with money from the business I helped him build," Mom continued, lifting her chin. "Half of that company was mine, even if my name wasn't on the paperwork. I took far less in the divorce than I deserved because I was young and foolish and didn't understand my rights. But that doesn't change the truth." A cold, creeping dread crawled up my spine. "Mom," I said slowly, "Dad left this house to me, not you." Her eyes softened, almost pitying. "Wills can be contested, sweetheart." I stared at her, then at Greg, then back at her. "You filed paperwork," I whispered. "Last week," she confirmed. "You'll be served in a few days. I wanted you to hear it from me first." It felt like a punch to the stomach. My breath left me in a sharp, painful burst. "You're trying to steal my house," I said, each word emerging jagged. Mom's mouth tightened. "I'm claiming what should have been mine." Greg cleared his throat, leaning forward. "Your mother's been more than fair, Juliana," he said. "We've been here for over a month, and she hasn't asked you for a dime. We need stability, especially the kids, and this house is perfect for a real family." I blinked. "A real family?" I repeated. Greg didn't flinch. "A stable home, good neighborhood, good schools. This environment is ideal for Brooklyn and Mason, and your mother deserves security. She's earned it." My shock slowly began morphing into something else, heat rising from the base of my spine, flooding upward until everything inside me felt molten. "I'm sorry," I said, standing abruptly. "Do you hear yourselves? This house belonged to my father. He left it to me. Legally, explicitly." Mom stood too, and the courts will decide whether those decisions were fair. I took a step back, feeling suddenly nauseous. "This wasn't temporary," I whispered. "You moving in. This was a plan." Mom winced. Greg did not. "Don't be dramatic, Juliana," she said. "We didn't plan anything, but once we were here, we realized how much sense it made." "How much sense what made?" Mom gave a sad little smile. "For us to stay." I felt something inside me crack, quietly but completely. "You want me to move out of my own home?" I asked. "You're young," Mom said softly. "You have your whole life ahead of you. You can rent somewhere else, start fresh. But the kids, they need this. I need this." I stared at her, barely recognizing the woman in front of me. She took a breath and delivered the final blow. "And of course," she added lightly, "you're welcome to stay here too. This can be a multi-generational home, a place for all of us." My jaw dropped. "You're offering me my own house?" She nodded earnestly, as though she were being generous. "You wouldn't have to pay rent or anything." I laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Greg frowned. "There's no reason to get hysterical," he said. "This is a practical solution for everyone involved." I turned to him slowly. "Oh, trust me," I said. "I'm nowhere near hysterical yet." Mom's expression hardened. "We know you're overwhelmed right now," she said. "But you'll see this is for the best. The lawyer thinks we have a strong case, and once the court recognizes the oversight, this will be legally ours." The words rang in my head like an alarm. "Legally ours, legally ours, legally ours." "Get out," I said quietly. Mom blinked. What? You heard me. My voice was low, shaking, but steady. Get out of my house. Juliana, don't be ridiculous. Get out! Greg stood abruptly, face reddening. This is as much our house as yours, he snapped. And soon, it's going to be fully ours. You can't kick us out. I pulled my phone from my back pocket. Watch me. Mom's eyes widened. You're bluffing. I dialed 911. Try me, I said, lifting the phone to my ear. When the operator answered, I didn't hesitate. Not this time. Yes, I said clearly. I need officers at my address. I have unauthorized occupants refusing to leave my home. The betrayal hit me like a physical force. My own mother, my mother, had looked at the house my father left me and seen not a memory, not a legacy, but an opportunity. And she'd taken it, without hesitation, without shame. When the police arrived, voices rose. Doors slammed. Brooklyn and Mason emerged bleary-eyed and confused. Greg swore under his breath. Mom called me selfish, ungrateful, cold. But I stood my ground, even as my heart cracked open. Officer Rodriguez finally faced me. Ma'am, he said gently, if you're the legal owner and they won't leave voluntarily, we can escort them off the property. I want them gone, I whispered. All of them, tonight. Brooklyn started crying. Mason asked if they did something wrong. Mom glared at me through tears. You're choosing a house over your family, she spat. I swallowed hard. No, I said, I'm choosing not to be manipulated. By midnight, their belongings were stuffed back into garbage bags, loaded into the battered Honda Civic. As Officer Rodriguez guided Mom toward the car, she turned back. This isn't over, she said coldly. I'll fight this, Juliana. I'll take what your father should have given me. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. Good luck with that, I said. When the taillights finally disappeared into the night, the silence that fell over the house felt suffocating. I walked into Dad's office, shutting the door behind me. The walls felt closer, the air felt heavier. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel him in the house at all. I felt alone, completely, utterly alone. I stared at the framed family photo on his wall. His smile, my smile. The edges blurred through my tears. This wasn't what you meant, I said aloud. Family helps family, right? My voice cracked. But what if they only help themselves? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the house felt different now. Not like a sanctuary, but like a battlefield that still smelled of smoke. And the war wasn't over, not yet. For 2 weeks, the house stayed painfully, unnervingly quiet. No footsteps running up the stairs. No kids arguing over the TV. No unsolicited thermostat adjustments. No lingering cigarette smoke near the pool. Silence, I learned, can feel peaceful, but it can also feel like punishment. I tried to settle back into normal life, back into my routines, my work, the quiet rituals that used to anchor me. But every time I passed the guest room, I saw Brooklyn's sketchbook on the nightstand, the one she'd forgotten in the chaos of that night. Every time I passed the hallway closet, I pictured Mason's sneakers lined up neatly beside mine. And every time I opened my fridge and saw only my groceries, my yogurt, my pasta, my neatly organized vegetables, I felt this odd heaviness. I told myself I shouldn't feel guilty, that I'd done the right thing, that boundaries were necessary, not cruel. But guilt doesn't care about logic. Guilt has its own language, its own persistence, its own gravitational pull. It sat with me at breakfast. It followed me to work. It crept into bed with me at night. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, an unknown number flashed across my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something, intuition, dread, softness, I don't know, made me swipe to answer. Hello? A voice came through, shaky and tired. Juliana, it's Greg. I closed my eyes. Of all people, he was the last one I expected to call. What do you want? I asked, not harsh, just exhausted. He swallowed hard, the sound audible over the static. I need to ask you a favor. I know, God, I know, I have no right to, but please don't hang up. I didn't speak. He took my silence as permission. We found my brother Danny. He lives in Flagstaff. He's got a poultry farm, and he's willing to let us stay with him, work with him. It's not glamorous, but it's something. His voice cracked in a way that startled me. But we don't have money for the bus, he continued quietly. We're still at the Desert Inn. We're out of cash, and the kids are scared. My chest tightened. In my mind, I pictured that motel, the peeling walls, the flickering neon sign, the smell of stale cigarettes. And I pictured Brooklyn and Mason in that place, 2 sweet kids who had never once asked for any of this. How much do you need? I asked. 300, Greg said. 4 tickets to Flagstaff, and maybe a little extra for food during the trip. I exhaled slowly. I'll give it to you, I said. But Greg, I want to see them before you go. The kids. And Mom. He let out a shaky breath, relief mixed with something heavier. I think she'd want that. She misses you. She's too proud to call, but she misses you. An hour later, I was pulling into the Desert Inn Motel on Van Buren. Up close, it was even worse than I remembered. The stucco was cracked. The parking lot needed resurfacing. The air smelled faintly of mildew and despair. Room 127's curtain was frayed at the edges. Greg opened the door before I could knock. He looked older, 10 years older, dark under his eyes, beard overgrown, shoulders sagging. Still, he stepped aside with a quiet, "Thank you for coming." Inside, the room was small. 2 full-size beds, a rickety nightstand, a bathroom that looked barely functional. Brooklyn and Mason emerged from the bathroom in clean clothes, their faces lighting up the second they saw me. "Juliana!" Brooklyn threw her arms around my waist. Mason wrapped his around my legs. Their hugs nearly knocked me backward. "Are you still mad at us?" Mason asked, his voice muffled against my jeans. I knelt down to look him in the eyes. "I was never mad at you," I said softly. "Not for a single second. I was mad at some choices the adults made, never you." Brooklyn studied me the way she always did, like she could read people better than most grown-ups. "Are we coming back to live with you?" she asked quietly. My heart twisted. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You're going to live with your Uncle Danny. He has a farm, with animals. You'll get to see chickens every day." Her mouth curved, but her eyes dimmed. "Will you visit us?" I glanced toward the bed where my mother was sitting. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her shoulders hunched, her hair unwashed, her eyes rimmed with red. She watched us like the words were strangling her. "Maybe someday," I told Brooklyn, "when everyone is ready." After the kids went back to packing their things, Mom stood up slowly. "Juliana," she said, her voice raw, "can we talk outside?" We stepped into the walkway, the night air cool against my skin. She took a deep breath, her face crumpled. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I was wrong, completely wrong." I swallowed. "Why did you do it?" Her chin trembled. "Because I was ashamed," she whispered. "Because I've been struggling for years and I didn't want to admit it. Because I thought maybe this house was my last chance at stability. For the kids, for me." She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "And because a part of me was angry," she continued. "I gave up so much in my marriage to your father. I was stupid and bitter, and I convinced myself I deserved that house, even though, deep down, I knew I didn't." "So you tried to steal it," I said quietly. She winced. "I tried to fix the past with something that wasn't mine." I crossed my arms, not out of anger, but to keep myself steady. "The lawsuit?" "I withdrew it," she said. "Last week. Told the lawyer I wanted nothing to do with it anymore. You'll get official confirmation soon." I nodded. Part of me relaxed. Part of me hurt even more. "I don't expect forgiveness," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry, and that I'm grateful you're helping, even after what I did." I didn't know what to say. Not yet. Some wounds need air before they can heal. The next morning, I drove them to the Greyhound station. Brooklyn held my hand the whole ride. Mason listed the animals he hoped to see on the farm. Greg sat quietly, staring out the window. Mom kept her hands folded in her lap, eyes puffy but calm. When the bus pulled up, the kids hugged me again. Brooklyn slipped a folded drawing into my hand, a picture of a small house with 4 smiling stick figures, her, Mason, me, and Dad. Beneath it, she'd written, "We love you." My eyes burned. I didn't fight the tears. As the bus pulled away, Brooklyn waving through the window, Mason pressing his hand to the glass, I felt something deep inside me shift. Not closure, not forgiveness, not yet, but something like hope. Small, quiet hope that maybe, someday, all of us could start over. For now, though, the only thing I knew for certain was this: letting them go hurt in ways I didn't expect, but holding on to them would have destroyed me. 3 months passed. A season changed, and somehow so did I. The house, once loud and chaotic and overflowing with other people's routines, slowly became mine again. Not just legally, not just technically, but emotionally, spiritually, quietly mine. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in small ways, subtle ways, ways you don't notice until you look back and realize the light shifted while you weren't paying attention. The first thing I did was reclaim the rooms. The guest bedroom Mom and Greg had used became a home office. Clean, minimalist, full of color swatches and post-it notes and campaign mock-ups for my marketing job. A space that felt creative instead of chaotic. The kids' room, once scattered with art supplies and mismatched toys, became a yoga and meditation studio. Soft lights, a salt lamp, a mat in the center where I learned to breathe again. The backyard pool sparkled the way it used to. No more floating toys drying in the sun. No more cigarette butts tucked along the edges. Just turquoise water reflecting the desert sky. Slowly, the entire house began to feel like it exhaled. On weekends, my best friend Amanda started coming over more often. We'd chop vegetables in the kitchen while gossiping about work. We'd sit by the pool at sunset, sipping wine and listening to the cicadas hum. Sometimes we invited a few coworkers for small dinner parties. Nothing elaborate, just laughter and music and candor. There was a joy to the quiet now, a freedom in the spaces that used to feel invaded, a comfort in knowing every mug, every blanket, every light switch was exactly where I wanted it. I didn't always feel healed. Sometimes guilt still tugged at me. Sometimes loneliness crept in. But it felt healthier, calmer, like I was living with my emotions instead of drowning under them. Mom texted occasionally, always updates about the kids, always gentle, careful, testing the waters without pushing too far. Brooklyn drew you a picture. She has it taped above her bed. Mason learned how to feed the chickens today. He says they're not as scary as he thought. Greg's picking up extra shifts at Danny's farm. He's working hard. Her messages were short, but they felt sincere. No guilt trips, no pressure. Just soft steps toward something resembling peace. I responded politely, but I wasn't ready for more. Some bridges don't burn, they just narrow. And walking back across them takes time. During all this, something unexpected happened. I started dating someone. His name was Trevor. We met at a sustainability conference my company partnered with. He worked in renewable energy, smart, grounded, with a dry sense of humor and a smile that felt like sunlight after a long monsoon season. He asked me out for coffee. Coffee turned into a hike turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a slow, steady rhythm where I learned how to let someone in again without losing myself in the process. One evening, when we were sitting by the pool sharing takeout, Golden Dragon finally, he asked me gently, "Why were you living alone in such a big house, if you don't mind me asking?" I almost lied, almost brushed it off with something simple. But he asked with such quiet sincerity that the truth slipped out. So I told him everything. The sudden move-in, the takeover of the house, the attempted lawsuit, the police, the motel, the bus station, the guilt, the boundaries, the letter I still hadn't told anyone about. Trevor didn't interrupt, didn't look shocked, didn't judge. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low breath. "I don't know if I could have kicked my own mother out," he admitted, "even if she was stealing my house, even if she was wrong." I nodded. I didn't know if I could either, until I had to. He took my hand, brushing his thumb lightly over my knuckles. "It wasn't about kicking her out, Juliana. It was about not letting someone rewrite your life around their mistakes." I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that until my throat tightened. He squeezed my hand once, gently. "You didn't choose a house over your family. You chose boundaries over chaos. That's strength, not selfishness." I let those words settle in. They felt like truth. Work got better too. My team landed a major client, thanks in part to the presentation I'd rebuilt from scratch on the night Mom knocked on my door with that "we need to talk" tone. My boss praised me in front of the entire department. For the first time in a long time, I felt good at what I did. Capable, steady, growing. And still in the quiet moments, folding laundry, scrolling through recipes, watering the plants Dad gave me, I would think about him. My father, the way the house smelled faintly of sawdust and spice when he was home, the way he whistled softly under his breath while building furniture, the way he'd rest his hand on my shoulder before saying something important. Sometimes I wondered what he would have said about everything that happened, whether he would have been proud of how I handled it, or heartbroken it ever came to that. One weekend, while cleaning out Dad's old closet, something I'd avoided for months, I found a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of winter blankets. Inside was a letter, addressed to me, dated 1 month before he died. My breath caught in my chest. But that moment, the moment I opened that letter, is something I'll never forget, or recover from. The letter was tucked inside a plain white envelope. No decoration, no flourish, just my name written in my dad's familiar, slightly uneven handwriting. To Juliana. My hands trembled as I opened it. I don't know whether I was ready for what was inside, but I knew this letter, this moment, was the final piece of something I hadn't yet been able to name. The paper inside had yellowed faintly at the edges, as if time had already begun to claim it. The ink, though, was dark and sharp and unmistakably his. I sat down on the floor right where I was, among boxes of old jackets and dusty photo albums, and began to read. And Jules, if you're reading this, it probably means I didn't get the chance to say everything I wanted to, so I'm writing it down, just in case life gets ahead of us like it sometimes does. I'm leaving you this house because I know you will take care of it. Not just the walls or the pool or the floors, but the memories inside. You understand what this place means. You've always had a good sense for what's worth protecting. But more than the house, I'm leaving you something else, my trust. I trust your judgment. I trust your heart. I trust you to decide who belongs in your life and who doesn't. You're generous to a fault, kiddo. You got that from your mother. But generosity without boundaries becomes an open door for people who don't always deserve it. Don't let anyone, take advantage of your kindness. Not because you owe them, not because you feel guilty, not because you're afraid to say no. You are stronger than you think, and braver than you know. Don't forget that. I love you, Jules. Dad. By the time I reached the end, I was shaking. Not crying, shaking. The kind of trembling that comes from something deep and ancient inside you finally cracking open. I read the letter again and again. Every sentence felt like a hand on my shoulder, steady and familiar. I had spent months wondering whether I had betrayed my family, whether kicking them out made me selfish, whether protecting my home meant I had failed them. But here it was, written in ink a month before he died, a warning, a blessing, a permission slip to put myself first without apology. It felt like Dad had reached across time, pulled me to my feet, and whispered, "You did the right thing." I pressed the letter to my chest and let myself finally cry, messy, shaking tears that soaked the paper but didn't blur the ink. His words were too solid, too needed, too perfectly timed to dissolve. Life didn't magically fix itself after that, but something inside me aligned. The weeks that followed were the most honest ones I'd lived in years. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I stopped lowering my voice to make space for people who took advantage of me. I stopped shrinking myself just to keep peace that was never mine to keep. Mom texted me one morning. "Kids started school today. Brooklyn made a friend. Mason asked if chickens can take baths. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'm glad they're happy. I'm okay. I hope you're doing better too." She replied with a single heart. Small, tentative, human. Our relationship wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but it was no longer poisoned, just wounded. And wounds can heal, slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. Trevor grew into a quiet, steady presence in my life. He didn't try to fix anything. He just sat beside me in whatever space I was in, messy or peaceful, and waited until I was ready to speak. One evening, he took my hand and said, "You know what I love about you? You don't just survive things, you grow from them." I didn't know how to respond, but the way he said it, I believed him. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in myself. Years from now, when I look back on this chapter of my life, I don't think the defining moment will be the night I called the police on my mother, or the day I found them gone, or even the morning they boarded the bus to Flagstaff. It will be the moment I opened my dad's letter. Because that was the moment I realized that protecting myself wasn't betrayal, that saying no wasn't cruelty, that being generous didn't mean being blind. It was the moment I learned the real lesson he'd left behind. Sometimes the hardest thing about family isn't loving them. It's loving them enough to say no. And that no can be the most loving, powerful, necessary word in the world. I folded the letter gently, placed it back in its envelope, and stored it in a small wooden box on my nightstand. A reminder, a compass, a promise. The house felt peaceful again. Not haunted, not empty, just full of possibility. I walked through each room, touching the walls lightly as if to anchor myself to the present. My home, my life, my choice. And I swear I heard it then, just the faintest sound. My father's laugh, echoing somewhere in the quiet, warm, proud. I smiled. "I'm okay, Dad," I whispered. "Really." And for the first time in a long time, I truly was.